For over half a century, a man who never had any medical training, never studied advanced biology and barely finished primary school would lie down in a trance and begin to speak. What came out of his mouth, recorded by stenographers who accompanied him, would come to be known as the readings of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet of Virginia. In an altered state of consciousness, he predicted earthquakes, shifts in the Earth's axis, the rise and fall of continents, and medical discoveries that would only arrive decades after his death. But among the thousands of recorded readings, there exists a set of predictions that for a long time was treated as a footnote, almost forgotten amidst the more grandiose prophecies about wars and cataclysms. Cayce spoke about animals, more specifically, he spoke about dogs, and he said something that at the time sounded like a mystical curiosity with little practical application, that in a moment of great spiritual transformation for humanity, dogs would cease to be mere domestic companions, to assume an active role in the crossing of human consciousness. He described them as bridges, not friends, not pets, not guardians in the common sense of the word, but bridges between the physical world and the spiritual world, beings that, due to their constant proximity to human beings and a sensitivity that science could not yet fully explain, would be among the first in the animal kingdom to awaken to a new function on Earth. For decades, this part of the prophecy was treated as something secondary. After all, what does it mean for a dog to spiritually awaken? To many researchers of Cayce's readings, the idea seemed too poetic to be taken seriously, perhaps more of a symbol than a literal prediction. But in recent years, as reports of extraordinary canine behaviors began to multiply in different parts of the world, independent researchers, spirituality enthusiasts, and even some curious minds from the scientific world began to reread these passages with different eyes. And what they found was surprising. Cayce was not speaking of an isolated event, but of a process, a step-by-step process, gradual, almost imperceptible if looked at day by day, but evident when one compares canine behavior of decades ago with what is observed today in homes, hospitals, shelters, and on the streets of cities around the planet. The first thing that draws attention when revisiting these readings is Cayce's insistence on stating that this change in dogs would not be a sudden event, but rather a development in phases. According to the records, the first phase would involve an intensification of the dog's sensory and perceptive capacity, especially related to health and the anticipation of events. This means, according to the interpreters of these readings, that dogs would begin to detect illnesses in their owners more accurately and more frequently, often before any apparent symptoms, and would also start to react more intensely to situations of imminent danger, whether natural, such as earthquakes and storms, or human, such as accidents and threats. The second phase, according to the most widely accepted interpretation among scholars of the subject, would involve the strengthening of a form of non-verbal communication between dogs and their owners, something many describe as canine telepathy, an ability to feel emotions, intentions, and even thoughts from a distance, without any physical or visual stimulus to justify such perception. And the third phase, the most advanced and the most difficult to prove under any conventional method, would be the emergence of a function of energetic cleansing and emotional healing, in which dogs would begin to act actively by absorbing tensions, balancing charged environments, and offering through their simple presence a kind of emotional support that goes far beyond the common affection between human and animal. What strikes those who begin to investigate this? The theme is that these three phases are not presented as the isolated speculation of a single 20th century seer. They find echoes, independently, in much older spiritual traditions. In various shamanic cultures, dogs have always been seen as guides between worlds, capable of seeing spirits, sensing presences, and accompanying souls in transition. In ancient Egypt, the figure of Anubis, with the head of a jackal, guided the dead through the underworld. In Nordic traditions, dogs accompanied deities in crossings between planes of existence, and in practically every human culture, in one way or another, the dog appears associated not only with physical loyalty, but with a sensibility that transcends the material world. The prophecy of Cayce, therefore, does not emerge in isolation, but seems to reconnect ancestral wisdom with a more modern, almost scientific language regarding the evolutionary role of these animals. And it is precisely by observing contemporary canine behavior that many find indications that this first phase, that of the keen perception of diseases and dangers, is already fully underway. Cases of dogs detecting cancer in early stages, long before any clinical exam confirms the diagnosis, have ceased to be a rarity and have become the object of study in universities and hospitals around the world. There are accounts of dogs that insisted on repeatedly sniffing a mole or a lump on their owners' bodies, until they, bothered by the animal's persistence, sought a doctor and discovered an early-stage melanoma. There are also the well-known dogs trained to detect diabetes crises, warning their guardians seconds before a dangerous drop or spike in glucose, often saving lives in situations where no electronic device would have had time to react. But what most catches the attention of those who believe in the prophecy are not just the dogs trained for this, but ordinary dogs without any specific training that are beginning to exhibit this type of sensitivity spontaneously, as if something within them were, in fact, awakening. Accounts like these are multiplying on forums, social media groups, and even in reports by regional news outlets. A woman in the interior of Brazil recounted that her vira-lata, a mixed-breed dog rescued as a puppy, began to refuse to let her leave the house on certain days, whining and blocking the door, until on one of these occasions she discovered, hours later, that a serious accident had occurred exactly on the route she usually took. Similar cases arise in different countries. Dogs that refuse to get into certain elevators minutes before a breakdown. Dogs that wake their guardians in the middle of the night, moments before a fire starts. Dogs that howl in an unusual way hours before earthquakes. A phenomenon already documented even by seismologists who, even without a complete scientific explanation, recognize that animals seem to perceive electromagnetic variations and vibrations in the ground long before human instruments. Beyond the cases of anticipating danger, there is a growing number of reports about dogs that seem to choose specific people to help, often in a way that defies any purely behavioral explanation. Shelter volunteers tell stories of rescued dogs that, when taken for adoption, ignore entire families interested in taking them home and walk directly up to an isolated person sitting in a corner who was going through a moment of grief, depression, or extreme loneliness, as if the animal knew exactly who needed that company most at that instant. Therapists who use dogs in emotional support sessions repeatedly report that the animals seem to instinctively approach the patients in greatest distress within a group, even without any obvious external sign that that person was worse off than the others. These episodes, when taken together, they form a mosaic of anecdotal evidence which, although it does not follow the rigor of a controlled scientific experiment, accumulates in sufficient numbers to make even the most skeptical question whether there is, in fact, something beyond coincidence taking place. And it is precisely this accumulation of cases, scattered across different continents, different cultures, without any coordination among themselves, that sustains the idea that the prophecy of Cayce's might not be describing an isolated phenomenon, but rather a progressive and global change in canine behavior. Moving on to the second phase described in the readings, the one related to energy healing and spiritual protection, the accounts become even more intriguing, though naturally more difficult to prove under any objective criteria. Practitioners of alternative therapies, healers, and even some health professionals more open to integrative approaches have begun to report in recent years an interesting pattern involving dogs in healing environments. In animal-assisted therapy clinics, volunteers describe dogs that, after sessions with patients in intense psychological distress, show visible signs of exhaustion, as if they had absorbed part of that person's emotional burden. Some owners report that their dogs start yawning excessively, trembling slightly, or seeking water and rest immediately after interacting intensely with someone in crisis, a pattern that, according to proponents of the canine energy cleansing theory, would be the physical manifestation of the process of absorbing and dissipating negative energies. In hospitals that use therapy dogs, staff report perceptible changes in the environment after the animals' visits. Patients who were agitated calm down, rooms that seemed tense gain a lighter atmosphere, and even medical teams report feeling a notable difference in the emotional climate of certain wards after the regular passage of these dogs. This type of report, of course, can be explained through more conventional avenues, such as the release of oxytocin provided by simple physical contact with an animal, something already proven by traditional science. But for those who believe in the prophecy of Cayce, this biochemical explanation does not annul the possibility that there exists, in parallel, a real energetic dimension being activated, and that science, in time, would merely find its own language to describe what spiritual traditions had already pointed to for centuries. Cases involving residences also fuel this narrative. Reports from families who began to notice positive changes in the atmosphere of their homes after the arrival of a dog are common, but some go beyond the ordinary, describing specific situations in which the animal seemed to react to invisible presences or energies. There are stories of dogs that start barking or growling persistently at empty corners of rooms, especially in houses where residents report feelings of discomfort or even phenomena considered paranormal, and that after some time living with the animal, these sensations disappear, as if the dog had in some way cleansed that space. Rescue reports also fall into this category. Dogs that insist on staying close to certain people in emergency situations, even without any command, physically protecting those they consider vulnerable, positioning themselves between the person and a perceived threat, whether it be a stranger, a wild animal, or even a natural risk situation. The sum of these reports gradually builds the image of an animal that has ceased to be merely a loyal companion to become, according to this view, an active spiritual guardian, present not only physically, but energetically in the lives of the people around it. If the idea of energy healing already challenges conventional understanding, the proposal of telepathic communication between dogs and humans is perhaps the most debated point of this prophecy, and also the one that most has attracted the curiosity of independent researchers over the years. The British biologist Rupert Sheldrake, known for his investigations into unconventional perceptions in animals, has dedicated a significant part of his career to studying this very phenomenon. In his research, he documented dozens of cases of dogs that seemed to know in advance the exact moment their owners decided to return home, even when that return happened at irregular times, without any predictable pattern, and even when the owner was miles away with no prior means of communication with those at home. In filmed experiments, dogs were observed heading to the window or the door minutes before the owner's arrival, even when such a return was decided spontaneously, without planning, which ruled out the possibility that the animal was simply recognizing a routine pattern. Beyond these more formal studies, there are countless testimonies from owners who describe their dogs reacting to thoughts or intentions even before any physical action is taken. People report that by simply thinking about taking their dog for a walk, without saying a word or getting up, the animal already runs to the door or to the leash as if it had captured the intention directly from the owner's mind. Others describe situations in which, while in a different location, they felt a sudden and inexplicable urge to return home, only to discover, upon arrival, that the dog was in distress, ill, or in danger at that exact moment, as if a kind of signal had been emitted and received from a distance, regardless of logical reason or any conventional physical explanation. These accounts, when analyzed through the lens of the Cayce prophecy, are not seen as coincidences, but as concrete manifestations of the second phase described in the readings, the phase of telepathic communication between dogs and owners. And what most intrigues the defenders of this view is precisely the increasing frequency with which these episodes have been reported in recent years, as if this capacity were in fact intensifying globally rather than remaining stable over time, as would be expected if it were merely a case of selective human perception or statistical coincidence. To understand why this change might be happening right now, it is necessary to go back to the root of the Cayce prophecy and observe a central element of his readings: the idea that the spiritual evolution of animals is directly connected to a rise in the collective consciousness of humanity. According to this view, dogs would not be developing these capabilities in isolation, on their own, but rather in response to a broader vibrational shift that is affecting the entire planet and all living beings that inhabit it. Cayce described at different moments in his readings a period of planetary transition, marked by intense crises, climate change, accelerated technological transformations, and events that would force humanity to rethink its relationship with the Earth, with other living beings, and with itself. This period, according to the interpreters of his prophecies, would be precisely what we are living through now, decades after his death, a time of global instability, rapid social and technological change, evident environmental crises, and also, paradoxically, a growing interest in spirituality, self-knowledge, and connection to something greater than the material everyday life. According to this line of thought, this scenario of crisis and transformation would act as a catalyst, a trigger for the awakening of dormant capabilities, both in human beings and in animals. Just as the number of people reporting more intense spiritual experiences, heightened emotional sensitivity, premonitory dreams, and significant synchronicities grows year after year, dogs, due to their unique proximity and ancestral to humans, would be equally affected by this wave of collective awakening. The explanation offered by this school of thought is that over thousands of years of coexistence and domestication, dogs have developed a deep, energetic bond with the human species, becoming in a way sensitive to the same frequencies that are awakening in current human consciousness. They would not be evolving in isolation, but evolving together as part of the same process, reflecting and amplifying what is already beginning to manifest within each person who shares life with them. This idea of a symbiotic connection between human evolution and animal evolution is not exclusive to the readings of Cayce's. It appears under different names and forms in various contemporary spiritual traditions that speak of a collective ascension of consciousness, a moment in which humanity, pressured by unprecedented crises and challenges, would be forced to access higher levels of perception and sensitivity. Within this view, dogs would therefore be the first messengers of this transition, the first to manifest in a visible and tangible way what is still only beginning to develop, more subtly and less perceptibly, within human beings themselves. Faced with all this, the question that remains for those following this narrative so far is simple and direct. How to recognize in practice if one's own dog is going through this process of spiritual awakening described in the prophecy. According to the proponents of this view, some signs deserve special attention. Sudden behavioral changes with no apparent cause, such as staring fixedly at empty spots in the room for long periods, reacting unusually to certain places or people, showing spikes of emotional sensitivity in relation to the owner's psychological state, or demonstrating intense protective reactions in moments of danger that the animal could not have perceived through conventional sensory means, are all considered possible indicators of this transformation in progress. Episodes of apparent anticipation are also mentioned, such as the dog positioning itself by the door minutes before someone arrives, or showing restlessness moments before negative events happen, even without any perceptible external stimulus. More than just observing these signs, however, the proponents of this prophecy insist that the most important thing is to cultivate a conscious connection with the animal, treating it not just as a pet, a word that many consider reductionist in view of the role these beings would be assuming, but as an active spiritual partner in each person's journey. This would involve dedicating genuine quality time to togetherness, paying attention to moments when the animal's behavior seems to deviate from its habitual pattern, and, above all, being open to the possibility that the dog beside the sofa, sleeping peacefully after a long day, might be there fulfilling something much greater than simple physical companionship, something that the very prophecy of Edgar Cayce over 60 years ago would have already anticipated. A silent, gradual, but deeply transformative spiritual mission, which would be revealing itself little by little before the eyes of those willing to see beyond the obvious. And it is exactly this invitation that lingers in the air at the end of this reflection. It is not a matter of demanding definitive scientific proof, nor of turning every bark or look from a dog into an automatic mystical sign, but rather of considering, with an open mind, the possibility that these animals, which for millennia have walked by our side, are now, according to this ancient prophecy, entering a new phase of their existence alongside humanity. A phase in which they cease to be just man's best friend, in the most traditional sense of the expression, to become, according to those who believe in this vision, guides, silent ones of a spiritual crossing that humanity itself, according to Cayce, is destined to traverse. And if this prophecy is truly unfolding before us, Perhaps the most important question is not whether we should believe in it, but rather whether we are, in fact, paying enough attention to what these watchful eyes by our side every single day are already trying to show us.